Hello, greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen. If it wasn't already obvious enough, this is the second part of a video I had made some months prior. So, if you haven't seen that, go watch that. If you already have, we'll dive straight back into where we left off. Also, she complains about her dead dad, boo-hoo, as if anyone cares. Wade then realizes he is an actual moron, but will subsequently do nothing to become less of one. Due to the information gleaned from their conversation, TJ Milhouse finds out Wade's full name and address. This results in the following scene where the Megacorp reach out to Wade. Here, Wade and Sorrento meet, and it's really boring. It's just each of them saying, "Greetings, I have knowledge on a movie that exists, which was a part of my childhood, and yes, I too have knowledge on a movie that exists, which was also a part of my childhood." Clearly, the greatest clash between these two intellectual titans. Sorrento offers Wade a deal.
What about my generous proposal?
Wade tells him to go fuck himself, and Sorrento responds in kind.
I had to make the offer. The board expected it, but I was really hoping you'd say no. Because if anyone's gonna win this competition, it's me.
And after that, he proceeds to start fucking with him.
By the way, I have your IP, I have your name, and I have your address. So, congratulations, you fucked up.
You really switched gears there, from fairly reasonable to maniacal overlord.
We should be grateful, Wade.
This is the part where you run away.
What are you doing?
With all that's going on in the world, you really think that anyone's gonna give a damn about an explosion in some ghetto trash rat barn in Columbus?
Sorrento, don't do this! I'm not even there!
Not for long.
So Wade's dipshit actions end up biting him in the ass royally as his home goes kaput and his aunt gets Uncle Bend. Man, what an absolute big brain you are. Wade then walks away in what I assume is a state of shock. I'm only guessing here because it really doesn't seem like this event affects him all that much in the grand scheme of things. You'd think losing a family member would invoke some sort of emotional response, but he is seemingly able to get over this incident within 2 scenes. I mean, granted, the initial shock of losing someone would still be fresh, and perhaps he doesn't know how to handle the situation effectively, but even then, he doesn't appear to be all that hung up on it for too long.
Stupid bitch.
With that being the case, what the fuck is the point in killing off someone close to him if it has no discernible impact on him whatsoever? You'd think this scene would be the turning point for his character, where he undergoes a significant change that alters him as a person, and I really do think that's what they were going for, but it's a gigantic dropping of the ball. The only real change that occurs is that he goes from searching for the keys for solely monetary purposes, to then searching for them for a somewhat higher cause, but that's all his character growth boils down to. Wade then gets kidnapped by a local skinhead who plans to rename him Wade Whites Only and is brought into this empty warehouse where he meets Artemis IRL. They go to this rooftop and actually have a conversation that discusses themselves for once. Though at this point, it's too little too late. It's just more of these two uninteresting characters talk about how uninteresting they really are. They also seek to make note of this weird birthmark thing she has, as if it was some horrific defect that's troubled her for many years. But if they hadn't even mentioned it, I probably wouldn't even have noticed, as it looks more like she suffered some significant sunburn, if anything. Sorrento then finds out Wade isn't actually dead,
I wasn't expecting any survivors,
and sends out drones to track him down. Meanwhile, Wade, Prince Zuko, and the Minority Squad figure out where the second key is, which leads them to this recreation of The Shining in order to find it. Also here, they really like to jerk off how scary The Shining is.
Are you absolutely sure you want to go here?
Absolutely positive.
Let's hope you have the belly for it.
I've never seen The Shining. Is it really scary?
I have to watch it.
through my fingers.
Okay, listen, I enjoy this film as much as the next self-enlightened video essayist, but other horror movies exist, guys. Now, this scene is somewhat odd in terms of how it fits into the rest of the movie, as it plays out as a homage to The Shining, with blatant references to events that happen within the film. Now, unless you have the IQ of a mentally defective gibbon, you'd realize that The Shining is a horror film, whereas this movie is more of an action-adventure type. So it's a bit weird when you splice in this segment into the film, as it's going to clash with it tonally. Obviously, there are examples where juxtaposing tones can work depending on what the creator is going for, but this is not the case here. Furthermore, this section isn't all that scary, considering it gets really fucking goofy with the giant CGI zombie lady. And then, almost immediately afterwards, they are using the same setting for comedic purposes.
Now we just have to win the Shining challenge.
Get her off me! Get her off me! Get her off me! Get her off me!
What the fuck is this?
I'm really not getting what you're trying to accomplish here, movie, but I don't think you're pulling it off. Not to mention, this segment really doesn't mean anything to you if you haven't seen The Shining. So all of two people, as well as the children that saw this movie with their parents, have essentially no attachment to what they're seeing on screen, and simply makes the movie more confusing for them in terms of tone. I think you can get somewhat of an understanding as to why creating a story by Frankenstein stitching several different properties with vastly different genres, and slapping a coat of paint over it may work well as a means of marketing, but doesn't work too well when trying to create a cohesive narrative. Long story short, they get the key and learn of the next clue to the final challenge. The Megacorp then raids their base of operations, where Artemis gets captured and Wade escapes with the help of the Minority Squad, who are all conveniently in the same geographical location.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Artemis is placed into what is referred to as a loyalty center, where they essentially force people against their will to play the game for them.
Hey, you! Those are explosives!
IOI will not reimburse any lost coin if you zero out.
It seems mighty illegal and probably violates a couple of human rights here and there. You know, it's kind of strange how much this mega corporation is seemingly able to get away with without people raising some seriously important questions. They can send out dozens of drones through the streets, can conduct SWAT raids where they capture people alive, and subsequently force these people to work for them, effectively making them slaves, with no one raising an eyebrow. It would make sense if they were a governing power, as one, this line of dialogue would actually make sense.
Welcome to the rebellion. Wade.
And two, it would mean they are above the law in this scenario, so they can do whatever the hell they damn well please. But, as you can already tell, that isn't the case, as we see later on the main villain gets arrested for, you know, trying to murder people.
Say goodnight, motherfucker!
This is why I brought up the dystopian comparison earlier, because I don't know how the fuck no one has brought this up or this issue hasn't been investigated. So the Megacorp find out that the last challenge is in this castle thing and have to figure out which retro video game they have to beat in order to win. Meanwhile, Wade and the others hack Sorrento's console system to make him think that they are holding him hostage, all in order for Wade to get his dishwasher back.
If you want to talk, we can talk. But you gotta put that gun down.
You killed my mom's sister. You think I won't kill you?
Also, who the fuck refers to their aunt as their mum's sister? If her death was so upsetting that it would literally drive you to murder someone, surely you would say something that would indicate that you were at least somewhat emotionally attached to her. Also, the sole reason they were able to hack his system is because Wade had seen his password when they had spoken earlier. Which I found pretty dumb, if I'm being honest. I wouldn't say it's out of the question or a plot hole, but this sequence mainly relies on now the villain being conveniently stupid and relies on Wade remembering the exact password 2 days prior. And given how Wade has been defined as a character at this point, I doubt he would even be intelligent enough to understand what the word password even means.
You stupid fucking cunt, you idiot!
And like I previously mentioned, there aren't any interesting character moments in these scenes, so you don't really give a shit about about whatever their plan is because you don't give a shit about them in general. Anyway, they help Artemis escape as Sorrento figures out their plan and sends people after them. And here we reach this scene where Wade gives this rousing speech, which unironically boils down to him saying,
"Gamers rise up."
And it somehow convinces people to assist him, despite it being really uninspired and not remotely original.
Because I found something much bigger than just myself. I found a cause. I found my friends. And yes, I know it's kind of a groaner, but I found love.
I mean, if he were to try this in real life, everyone would likely call him the gay retard that he is and go about their day. The reason I bring this up is because at no point is Wade presented as a charismatic individual. So in what sense are we really supposed to believe that this dude, who could barely talk to the girl he's hardcore thirsting after, be capable of enacting this roaring speech that would convince thousands of people to risk their virtual selves? When at any point have we seen Wade talk his way out of a situation or been charismatic in order to achieve something, or even show any form of good leadership skills? And as I say this, I do mean that you could make Wade into an interesting character if you were to present him in this way. For example, say if Warner Brothers knocked on my door and said,
"Hello, Mr. ShamWow. We would like you to become another cog in the machine and make us a movie that will give us millions of dollars, as well as endless marketing opportunities to sell shitty and cheap figurines to people foolish enough to buy them."
Hello friends and welcome to Reddit.
If I was to take them up on their offer, I would write Wade as someone who is both charismatic and intelligent while also being resourceful with what he has to work with. I would have him create a series of backup plans and strategies to ensure that he stays ahead of his opponents to ultimately win this contest. However, that would also be one of his most fundamental flaws, as he would be so obsessed with winning it would affect him both physically and mentally. It would lead him to make significant mistakes that he otherwise wouldn't have made and would force him to self-reflect on both his actions and his mindset. He would then want to change the path that he has taken, which would also tie back into the film's theme, that being so attached to a virtual world does not substitute the experiences one can have in the real world. Though you would likely have to change major aspects of the story for this character change to be applicable here. Ultimately, I think, at least conceptually, this idea of a protag works better than the one we currently have. Now, once again, to the three people who actually enjoyed this movie, and once again, we'll come to its defense by saying Wade being characterized as an average awkward nobody makes him more interesting, relatable, and grounded, as well as providing a message that highlights that anyone is capable of being a part of something much greater than themselves. And sure, okay, yeah, why not? I'll concede that you can make an interesting character out of an average nobody. Yet here, they've created this sometimes conveniently competent, sometimes conveniently stupid dingleberry that has incredibly simplistic character motivations which are barely explored or discussed. Either way, Wade's speech works, and we're greeted to the final action set piece. Here you can apply the same points I had from the previous action scene, though this time it's overplayed with popular 80s music. I had failed to mention this earlier, but this is one of the several instances where the movie feels the need to play such music, even though, in some cases, the music isn't remotely relevant to what is happening on screen. And yet again, this is but another instance where you get to watch things from popular things interact with things from other popular things. Now, while I've touched on it briefly, with this section in particular, I'm about to go full force on why I have such an issue with these continual references. And yes, I do know full well that this is not an original criticism of this film. In fact, it's probably the most prevalent when it comes to the people who deride this movie.
Yeah, because the references, they're over the young kids' heads. They're like Buckaroo Banzai. Yeah. There's a fucking Buckaroo Banzai reference in this movie.
Yeah, it's a weird combination of lots of things. And so that's why I think it's a little bit of a clusterfuck.
Obligatory red letter media reference. Believe me, I tried to avoid it.
But to ignore it seems a tad silly to me when it's obvious that this is such a significant part of the movie, and honestly, I find ranting about this offers me some much needed catharsis. Other than being simply used as a means to coax money out of very intelligent people, the issue I have with them using material from other popular franchises is that it adds nothing on a narrative level. Now, I've already mentioned this earlier, but here let's expand on this idea for a hypothetical scenario, where none of these references are in the movie, where the DeLorean is simply a normal car and the Akira bike is just a regular bike. If such a scenario were to occur, absolutely nothing would change. If you were to replace the Gundam with some of a robot and the Mechagodzilla with some other mech lizard monster, nothing would change. If they don't add anything to the story, then why are they in here if you aren't going to use them for your own benefit? Because if you do find enjoyment out of these references, that is only for you. For example, I've never seen Akira, so having the bike from Akira absolutely does nothing for me on a personal level, nor does it add anything to the movie on a narrative level. It's just sort of there. Subsequently, I assume this is the same for people who are in the same circumstance as me. We don't associate with it on an emotional level, and are maybe somewhat confused as to why they've put so much prevalence into something that to us has no inherent worth. And even if I were to get it, I doubt it would do much for me anyway. I'm sorry to the people that can actually watch this movie and cream their pants at the mere sight of the Battletoads, but frankly, I just don't get it. And this works the same way for me, even when I understand the references that are being presented. It can be safely said that during my childhood, Back to the Future was my favourite movie. And despite it being a movie that I've seen dozens of times at this point, seeing the DeLorean in this movie really did nothing for me. It had virtually no emotional impact on me, and again, like the previous example, doesn't really do anything for the film's story. Furthermore, one of the major aspects that made these franchises be so beloved in the first place was that they had at least some degree of originality, which is sorely lacking here. And to those who have purchased several Funko Pops and are now trying to erroneously justify your poor financial investments, you may argue that while these references might not add anything to the narrative, they are harmless enough that it doesn't matter if they were included or not. Okay, sure, but two things. One, it's obvious that this is nothing more than a cheap marketing gimmick to satisfy individuals like yourselves. Their sole existence is to invoke this kind of reaction.
That's the DeLorean!
DeLorean, yes!
Yup.
It's the adult equivalent of a parent dangling a bunch of keys in front of their child in order to get their attention. You can enjoy these references, you can get something out of them, but don't tell me that they aren't anything more than superficial pandering to your specific tastes. And two, the film's reliance on other materials not only adds nothing to the film, but rather actively detracts from it. Meaning it can't succeed narratively speaking on its own because it relies too much on what others have done, but not about what the movie itself does. Even ignoring all of that, there is still the fact that all of these references are not even faithful to their original source material. I've already mentioned how the Shining section is tonally all over the place, which serves as a pretty good example of this, but it's not the only one. I mean, do you not think it's a little bit discourteous to have the Iron Giant rip and tear shit apart, as it completely disregards the core message of that movie?
It's bad to kill. Guns kill. And you don't have to be a gun. You are what you choose to be. You choose.
If you're going to include these references into the film, why not use them in a way to show that you actually care about what you're stealing from? If you're going to use the DeLorean, how about you involve some sort of time travel ability? Maybe Wade can rewind his position back 10 seconds or something. You could honestly do something with these references if you actually bothered to care about how they relate to their source material. In summary, these references aren't endearing homages to the countless films and games that are beloved by many. It's basic pandering that does nothing for the story and would barely change anything if they were removed entirely. However, besides all that, there is one thing about this sequence that does tickle my belly, and it's that during this scene you have several instances where you see people play the game in public looking like absolute spurgs. It's even more hysterical because I'm imagining at some point some deranged maniac will just decide to tear through crowds of people as if he's playing a game of Twisted Metal.
When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
Well, that was fucking scary.
Unfortunately, aside from the hearty chuckle that came from all of this, the action here goes on for a bit longer than necessary. I mean, you see a bunch of people get blown the fuck out and that's nice and all, but after a while it starts to get tedious. Especially when you can already guess what the outcome is going to be. Which is, predictably, that Wade ends up beating the challenge, but before he can get the key, Sorrento enacts video game jihad and kills everyone.
Psych!
Wade actually has a free life, a bit of reincorporation from which I spoke of earlier, and like I said, is kind of neat as I didn't really see it coming.
I am invincible!
That, or I just couldn't remember it. Either or, pick your poison. So as Wade ends up winning, he gets to meet video game version of Halliday that is essentially sequel bait, and this scene really only exists to hammer home that incredibly poignant nothing can replicate reality theme.
As terrifying and painful as reality can be, it's also the only place that you can get a decent meal, because reality is real.
Or, as Mr. Steven Boomerberg likes to put it,
this is not reality, not reality, not reality.
And now that we've reached this point, let me explain why this theme is kind of shit. And I don't mean in premise, because that alone is fine, but in terms of how it's executed. The film's core message becomes contradictive due to how they glorify the Oasis. They present it as this wondrous thing where you can do anything and be anyone, which is juxtaposed with only a handful of negative aspects. Examples being this woman burning her food, this Asian man trying to kill himself, this douchebag gambling away all their money, and these loyalty center things, which aren't really anything wrong with the game itself, but are more so just these megacorps trying to exploit people. Yet, these are the only examples of people being obsessed with the game to the point that it affects them negatively. There is no indication, at least from my perspective, that the majority of people are like this. Now, I don't want this film's theme to be hammered over my head, but I would prefer something a bit more substantial than what we were given. Now, some may argue that a lot of the glorification here comes from Wade's biased perspective of the game. And yeah, maybe, but it comes across as weakly done. His narration throughout the film is presented more literal than figurative, and rarely conflicts with what we are shown on screen. This is why the narration could have been used well if Wade was an unreliable narrator. This would mean Wade would paint a picture of the Oasis in his mind and state it to the audience, but the audience is shown, through the film's visuals, fundamental contradictions to what he is saying, highlighting Wade's obsession with the game and his attachment to it. And doing so could have actually made for some really interesting character traits, but here it's done so incredibly half-assed. But okay, let's pretend that the film does present the Oasis in a fairly negative light, as a means to tie back into its theme, but even taking that into account, that's not the main problem with it. The crux of the issue is that Wade is routinely rewarded for being obsessed with the game, pop culture, and its creator, and he isn't rewarded with small insignificant things. He is rewarded with friends, with a girlfriend, with celebrity status, and most importantly, with billions of dollars. He owns the largest game in existence. He will never have to worry about any financial related issue ever again. His life will be significantly less troubled from here on out. All the effort he put into the game was rewarded, and it kinda makes your please stop playing on the Xbox message come into conflict with itself. Furthermore, when Wade, admittedly stupidly and misguidedly, tries to actually interact with someone in the real world,
So, I've been thinking, maybe it'd be cool if we met up in the real world.
he's punished for it. The film contradicts its message because it intends to cement a problem within its own world, but the actions the characters make contradict said problem because they are rewarded by partaking in the problem, thus inadvertently promoting it. Also, here's a bright idea: if you didn't want people to be obsessed with your game, maybe don't offer them billions of dollars if they figure out your fucking autistic challenges. Yes sir, please stop playing video games and go outside and play, where instead of winning enough money to buy a small European country, you can get hepatitis C. Honestly, I would have laughed so hard if this dude was just fucking with everyone this entire time. Like, he sent them all on this wild goose chase and they got nothing out of it.
You get nothing!
No joke, that would have actually tied into the movie's main theme a lot better, and I would have given it major props if it ended up doing that. But as it stands, the film's core message is flawed and contradictive. During this, Sorrento then shows up to deal with them himself, surrounded by people who know full well that he killed some of them.
We know what you did here. You turn around and walk out of here while you still can.
Several of which he has their back turned to, and none of them do a thing.
Police! Help! Police! Help! Police! Help! Help!
Okay, movie, the one time someone could act illogically and be completely justified in doing so, no one does. Someone here would have attempted to take him down. They know he's responsible for the explosion. Wade conveyed this in his speech. Someone here would have known someone who died and they would be, understandably, a bit upset about it. Even when he points a gun at a bunch of teenagers, someone would have spear tackled the fucker, but no one does. But for some reason, he has a change of heart and decides not to kill them. I have no idea what this is meant to convey, but the end result is him getting arrested by the police, so it's not like it matters anyway. So the film begins to wrap up with another narration, as Wade and the gang are all billionaires now, and Wade is definitely going to need it because within the next few months, he's going to experience firsthand what gonorrhea is.
People need to spend more time in the real world.
I fucking got that.
Reality is the only thing that's real.
Fuck you!
And there we have it. Now, if I were to summarize Ready Player One as a whole, I'd say it's a film that has occasionally redeemable aspects, but is ultimately bogged down by tedious dumb shit. Because as much as I ragged on the film's usage of media that is superior to itself, or just as bad in some cases, I'd have to say that it's the least obnoxious part about this movie. Its uninteresting and by-the-numbers plot, its contradictive themes, its complete lack of interesting characters, or character development for that matter, and its dog shit romance are the film's more egregious sins. Now this raises a very important question. Would this movie be better if it weren't so focused on filling it to the brim with a gazillion different references most people would not understand? That answer would be yes, but would it still make the movie good? That would be a no, because from what I can glean, Mr. Klein is not a remotely good writer. However, if that was the case, these videos wouldn't be a thing. Because, quite frankly, I wouldn't be here discussing this movie if it were not for its continued usage of pop culture. Because I, as well as everyone else, would have no idea what this movie was. This movie didn't sell because of its ingenious writing or its deep, complex themes. Warner Brothers didn't make this movie because they thought the book was well written, or because it was a heartfelt homage to countless franchises that shares sentimental value with millions of people. They saw something they could easily exploit. Ready Player One is simply another example of the obvious attempts by Hollywood to convince you to watch their poorly crafted dog turds by baiting you in with promises of nostalgia. However, it is slightly different in this regard, as whereas studios used to bait audiences with one intellectual property, Ready Player One uses multiple intellectual properties morphed into one congealed blob. Simply a bigger piece of bait to catch a bigger fish. And it worked, I think. Now, I'm not a numbers person, so I'm not entirely sure how much profit this pulled in for them, but it definitely made a significant portion of money. Also, you cannot assert that this movie was successful solely because of SS's name alone, because otherwise this movie wouldn't have bombed. Hard. This movie is not only a disservice to all the things it tries to pay homage to, but it's a disservice to whatever story they're trying to tell, because whatever potential it has is bogged down by a bunch of shit that prevent it from becoming its own thing. And yes, this may seem like I'm preaching to the choir here, which is a fair assessment, as complaints against Hollywood and their complete lack of originality are commonplace nowadays, and you'll likely say that I too am fueling the problem, as I purchased this very legal copy of this movie that I 100% bought. And yes, you would be right about that. But apparently, it still needs to be said because you mentally stunted ragamuffins don't learn your lesson. Maybe I wouldn't have to point this out if you people would stop funding this crap again and again and again.
It's like printing my own money.
This isn't the last time you'll see something like this, because despite Hollywood's failures, it hasn't hindered them from trying again and again. And at the current rate, it's unlikely to stop anytime soon.
Hollywood, remember kids, it's not important if it's of high quality. Only